you very much. I'm really happy to be here and be able to talk about my favorite topic, which is social innovation and especially an unconditional basic income. So at the beginning, I want you all to imagine a society that actually has a social contract that is based on trust instead of fear and a lot of pressure. For me, an unconditional basic income could be this new social contract that we could actually introduce into our societies. So maybe as a start, I just want to ask, like, who of you actually could describe or knows what actually an unconditional basic income means, what the concept actually means? Raise your hands, don't be shy. I won't ask you afterwards and test you on it. There are some hands, but I think the majority of people didn't raise their hands, so maybe for you who are new here, which is always nice, an unconditional basic income is the idea that people in a society get minimum income, which is not connected to any obligations, or they don't have to go and work for it. It's just guaranteed, like it's a income floor that is guaranteed for everyone, which is without any condition to it. So that's the idea behind basic income. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about why I think that basic income would be really important to get innovation in our societies forward and actually get into the future. And maybe after hearing what basic income is, I want you to ask, could I actually get the next slide? I want you to ask, if you think of the concept of basic income, would you say that it is rather a nice utopia? Raise your hands if you actually think that it's nice, but I'm not so sure if it will come in the next years. Don't be shy, just raise your hands. So there's some people who think it's utopia. Who are the ones who are a bit braver and think like, yeah, this is actually a social policy that we could introduce in our countries and just maybe we could have it in some years. Raise your hands. Also a few hands. I think you're half-half. I think that's very normal. It's social innovation, so innovations always kind of need time to actually sink in and become reality. Could I get the next slide? I first of all want to talk about a little bit, like why actually do we need a basic income? What do I think it would improve in our societies? So first of all, there's this idea that we could eradicate poverty with it. If you look on it on a global level and you see how much money we actually hand out in development aids and stuff like that, if we would just transfer this money on a very small amount directly to the people as cash transfers, we could actually eradicate the hardest poverty cases we have on the world. So, for example, like the poverty rate that we actually talk about here is only $10 a month, which is not a lot from a Western perspective, but it would be enough to actually get a lot of people out of poverty. So this would be one idea, that if we would have it globally, it could actually solve the problem of poverty. But I think it's also about equal chances and what we actually lose out on, even in Western countries, if we don't have it. I'm from Germany, which is a comparatively rich country, but still, if you, what education you get, or even thinking about if you will ever start a business on your own in your life depends highly still on which family you actually come from. And I think this is ridiculous in the time we are living now. And I believe that the basic income could change this, because it would mean that more people actually would have the basis to invest in their future and have the minds free to actually do that. And if you look at some studies that actually research what poverty does to people, or just the lack of money. I mean, the people wouldn't even consider themselves poor, but even the lack of money, what it does to people. I mean, there's studies that if you don't have enough money for your normal basic life, it actually can reduce your IQ level, and it takes up so much headspace to talk about and deal with all the problems that come along with money. And if you think about all this capacity that is taken up in our societies, that actually people worry about their basic needs and how they can fulfill it. And if we could put forward all this energy and just create something good with it, create something good for ourselves, but others in our surrounding, I think we would all benefit from it if we would harvest all this kind of unused and untapped potential that we actually have. So here are some reasons. I think I'm also a feminist. I think that universal basic income would also change something about the role of women in our society. Just imagine if everyone in our society, their basic needs would be taken care of, and everyone had have a certain amount of money that they have to invest in things they want to do. I think it would also improve how many women would maybe just get up and do startups and stuff like that. Just try something new, just be braver to kind of do something that hasn't been tried out, which this festival is so much about at the end. So I think there are a lot of good reasons. It doesn't matter if you're just someone who wants to make this world a more equal, more just place, or if you just think that innovation is really important and that we just should create a society where we can all work towards a better future. I think both sides could be really improved with having a basic income. Next slide, please. So why I'm standing here is, I mean, it's a festival for doers, and I prefer not just talking about things, but also doing something about it, and I founded a social startup in Germany, and we want Germany to actually do a state pilot on basic income. So we want up to 10,000 people to just try it out and see what kind of different policies there are. So we don't just want to test one basic income, but also different models. And we afterwards want to really be able to answer the question, not only do we want a basic income or not, but if we want it, how should it look like? What would be something that we would consider a just social contract? What is the best social contract that we would have that actually supports the aims that we have as society? So the first of all, next slide please. So we want our society to actually test basic income. We want the state to get more innovative, let's say it, and just try the things out. We've been talking about basic income for decades, and not a lot of things have changed. But I think it's about now to try it out, and there's a lot of support in it. If you look at different social innovations that took place in the past, every of them at the beginning was considered something that couldn't be done, that people would laugh about, that people couldn't imagine. And I think it's the same about basic income. And if you look into innovation theory and see like how innovations actually come along, first of all, there are the innovators, afterwards there are the first movers, and at some point the majority would follow. And if you look at the numbers, I only know them for Germany, but it's over 50% of people that actually say, if they are asked, I think it would be a good idea to introduce a basic income in Germany. And I think that's a lot. It's not just innovators or the first movers. We're already talking about a great majority of people who could imagine that we could change our society towards this direction and give people kind of the freedom and the safety to actually take better care of their own lives. And if you look at the history examples, like for example, I don't know, in the feminist history, there were people who said it was impossible that females could vote. Or just look, like my mother, she wasn't allowed to wear trousers. Just imagine, I'm standing here where it's so normal that I'm standing here in front of you wearing trousers. My mother wasn't allowed to wear them, and it's not that far in the past. And it was not imaginable. But I think at some point, I hope we would look back and see that a lot of the social innovation that we now see as utopia actually became reality if we just work towards them. Next slide, please. So what we actually do, we are an organization that organizes a political campaign. We have got over 70,000 supporters who actually get involved in this process, and we use direct democracy processes to organize a referenda, different referenda in Germany to actually vote on the topic of this pilot that I just suggested for Germany. So we want the people to actually think about if they really want this, if they want this in their own country, and if they want to pay their tax money on it, which is also an important question. And for that, we built a digital platform where we actually organize the people. So it's a lot about getting the people involved, what they need, all the kinds of steps. We automate a lot of this, and at some point, we hope that we can actually hand over this digital platform that we are building in order to do all the organizing work more digital to other social innovations, so that they can use it and kind of like use all the learnings that we actually made in this several years of like organizing for this topic of basic income. Next one. So we are not the only ones who actually took steps towards getting a basic income in our state. There are a lot of different examples worldwide. The first ones dating back from the 70s in America and in Canada, where they already did research on basic income. There they didn't actually introduce it because there was no political will at the end, because the government changed. And there were other examples, like for example in Kenya, Namibia, in India. I think the India example is also very interesting, because there they could show that even with a little amount of money they would hand out to the people, 40 times the economic growth was actually generated afterwards by handing it out. So I think if you look at that, it's also not just a social question if we want to have this basic income, but I think it's a highly economic and political question, that it would actually benefit all our societies and not just the people who benefit actually from this cash transfer. There are also recent examples from the Western world. I think the most known one, you might have heard of it, is the one that was in Finland. A lot of the press actually covered it, that it was a failure, that it was not working, but I think it was misinterpreted from my point of view, because at the end, what they did is they just had the same amount of money that they would normally hand out in their social system. But now what they changed is that it was unconditional, so people wouldn't be punished if they wouldn't do certain things. They just got the same amount of money, and it wasn't more expensive for the state, but it showed that the people had less stress, that they had better mental health, that they get better trust in the state. And I think these are all good results, and if it doesn't cost the state more, why put all this pressure on the people if it doesn't make any difference? People didn't get more or less jobs afterwards. It was the same like in the control group. So I think this is a good example of how we actually could look at our policies and actually create them in a way that actually is research-based and not just on our fears that we actually have against new social policies. You can also look, if you don't want to wait for the state to do things, there are a lot of movements in the cryptocurrency area. I mean, if you think about that, if you create a completely new money system, obviously you're free to create it the way you want it, and why not integrate something like a basic income model into a cryptocurrency? There are several examples of cryptocurrency who already do this. One of them is Circles, I don't know if you heard of it, and another one is the WorldCoin, which is kind of the Silicon Valley version of it and is in the news quite a lot in the last days. And they both have the aim to actually, in the money creation process, to not just let few people benefit from this money creation process, but instead handing it out to everyone who actually is using this cryptocurrency. I think these are interesting approaches, and I'm really curious how this will go on in the future. But you can see all around the world, there's kind of like a lot going on in the topic of basic income, and I think we will see a lot of innovation coming from this field in the next years. Next slide, please. And as basic income is a very emotional topic, I think it's also time to talk about a little bit about the fears and the hopes behind it. I think I already talked to you a little bit about the hopes at the beginning. So the idea is that it could be a society that trusts people much more, that it would change how people actually interact with others, but also with the state. So there's this whole kind of range of hopes that people actually have when they support basic income, but there are also extremely number of fears that people actually have. People often ask me, do you actually think people still go to work when they get a basic income? don't you think people will take advantage of it? And I think there are no really hints in any of the social research, if you look at it, that if you hand over things to people with trust, that there are a higher number of people who would actually take advantage of the system. In contrary, it's not the case. And also from the studies that already have been conducted, if you look at them, none of them had the result that people stopped working. People worked. It's part of our identity that we actually give back to community, and our paid work is part of that. But what you could see, for example, is that people in the Canadian one, they reduced hours, so some worked less. But if you look in the future and in what's like moving in the tech sector, I think it's obvious that we at some point will be able to reduce our hours. We haven't reduced our working hours in the last decades, even though our society has changed dramatically. And I think for me, it's not a bad thing if people would just work some hours less. It's totally doable with the technical advancements that we have. And yeah, I think it's good results. There are a lot of fears. But there are also a lot of good arguments why I think they don't become real. But I don't really suppose that we just introduce a basic income in all the states or in the state where I'm from right away. I suppose that we test it, that we get more innovative as a state and just try it out, just fail fast. If it's not the right thing, then I'm also not for introducing a basic income, but it might improve. So why not do pilots on it and see and ask the questions that are interesting for us? See, are there more female founders, or do the more unprivileged groups get more access to chances and create their own future with us in a more equal way? These are all interesting questions that could be asked in the pilot, and that's what I'm putting forward, that actually we test this. And next slide. I think at the end, we just miss out a really huge chance if we don't even try out what a basic income could be for society. So it might not work, but I honestly think it would. I dare to dream that actually a basic income could improve how we as societies work together and could improve the situation of a lot of people. And yeah, that's kind of like my proposition, and I hope sincerely that maybe my children or my grandchildren will say the same about an unconditional basic income, like I said before about wearing trousers on the state. I hope that they will just take it for granted and just live with an unconditional basic income. And I invite you to maybe dare to dream about a society that is built on trust instead of fear with me, and hope that it will create an environment for true social innovation for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura. And now we're going to take some questions. I know there are quite a few questions already as you were speaking, so if we can put some on the screen. And if you do want to ask a question, if you haven't done so already, go to slido.com, use the code REFLECTFEST, and then choose this room, which is the Old Port room. So we've got quite a lot. Should we just start from Mr. Jindrik? Jindrik, are you here? That's you. Okay, and Jindrik is asking, would not make more sense to provide full access to critical services like healthcare, counseling, basic housing for free, rather than money without checking?
That's an interesting question. Actually, if you look at how you define a basic income, you could take parts of it to just hand it over to people as goods. It doesn't have to be all money. I think some of the things we actually need in life are easier to solve by giving people money, so that they actually can do their own choices. But for example, like one of your examples, the housing for free, it could be one part of the basic income that we actually hand out. It would also be possible to have kind of parts and parts. So I think it's not one or the other, and there's a lot of different ways that you could structure this kind of the basic income that you create. But I think the core to it is that it has to be unconditional, that people still have the freedom to do their own choices. Because I think that's the whole power of the system. And if you can create this by handing out a lot of different goods and services and access to things, then yeah, why not do that? But that would be kind of my condition, that it is unconditional.
Thank you. Do you want to pick any of the other questions? I think we did the first. Do you want to do the second one with Yannis Pavlou?
Yeah, I'm just reading it.
What can you tell us about the sustainable economic evaluation on the UBI approach, at least in Germany?
I think I don't understand the question.
Where's
put it
Yannis?
forward?
Yannis.
It was about the economics. For example, in the state that you would like to get it introduced or piloted, what do the numbers look like? Can you do it at what scale? How much is it going to cost extra, not extra?
Yeah. So first of all, the first question, yes, you can do it. It always depends on kind of like there are different ways of actually financing a basic income. It doesn't like there are different heights you can actually hand out. So that's like one factor, what it will cost. So that's also a decision that policymakers at the end need to take, like what height is actually a good one. But that's why we wanted to test in the pilot different policies that you could create to actually also see, does it make a difference to have like the 200 euros more, or doesn't it? It's more the unconditional part of it that actually changes things in life. And there are different ways to actually finance it. And that, I think you can answer that in different ways depending which political kind of like background you come from. Some say you should finance it from the taxes that you actually have on labor. Others say you should tax the rich. It depends which kind of like side you come from. But basically, it's if you look at it very technically, it's a big change in our taxation system. And obviously, there are decisions to take, and that depends a bit on kind of what political agenda you want to have.
I hope that answers Yannis Pavlou's question. There's another one which I think I want to ask that question. If basic income becomes a reality, would everyone get equal amount of income?
Yeah, so the idea is that, yes, everyone would get the same. There are discussions about that maybe children would get a smaller amount, so this would be something which also would be possible, that they could get the same amount like everyone, which would be, I think, very beneficial for all the families out there, but it's also possible to say that smaller children, for example, get a small amount. But except of that, everyone should get the same amount. And before I get the question afterwards, that doesn't mean that we hand out money to rich people who don't need it, because obviously we are free to create our taxation system around it, and people who have more money and don't really need the basic income can be taxed more, so at the end they kind of get a zero at the end. They don't get more than before. But yeah, if you want to, you can obviously hand it out to everyone, but I think it's very crucial to the concept of basic income that everyone actually gets the same amount, because it's something that you can, it's very easy, it's very unbureaucratic, and you can depend on it, and you know that everyone else is getting the same like you, and then it's you who can decide where to go from there.
We have time for one more question, if you'd like to pick from any on the screen. Do you have a favorite?
There's a lot of question about trust and advantage, so I might take the last ones.
So the last one, does culture?
The last one and the one above, because I think they're very...
Okay, so we're going to look at what criteria do you think should be followed for basic income, or do you suggest everyone just gets it without merit because some people will take advantage? And you're going to also cover the second one?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I don't really think that people, it's a huge cultural myth that there are cultures who are more honest than others. And if you look into cultural research, I'm a social psychologist from background, and it's not really the case that there are societies who are more trustworthy than others. But obviously, the fact if you could accept a concept like that, I think that does depend a lot on the society you come from. is your society very based on kind of like achievement? So you should only get something if you achieve something, or is it more a society that actually honors everyone in the society the same, independent of their achievements? And I think that is a very deeply rooted cultural thing. Coming from Germany, I can tell you I'm very much on the side of achievement. But I learned that this is not actually how it's the best for everyone. And yeah, the question of if people would take advantage of it, I mean, if we do the pilots and people would all take advantage of it and it wouldn't work then we wouldn't be able to actually introduce it, and it would be gone as a policy very soon. But if you look in the research that we actually had before in the last decades, there are no indicators that people actually do that. And there's always a very small minority that takes advantage of what is kind of like there for the whole community. But to be honest, we have a social welfare system in Germany already, and there's a small percentage of people who maybe take advantage of it, but it's a very small percentage. And I think it will be the same when you actually introduce a basic income. And that's something that weighs much less when you look at what we actually lose out on as a society if we don't introduce it. So it's a little bit like the climate change question, you know? How much does it actually cost us to do something against climate change, and how much will it cost us if we don't? And I think it's the same with basic income. I think the loss is much higher if we actually don't introduce it and miss out on all the kind of innovation and all the inputs that people could actually give that are now restrained off to a lot of resources at the moment in the societies we have.
Laura Brämswig, thank you very much. A subject which I'm sure has touched and it reflects on a lot of people in here. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. Laura, ladies and gentlemen.